so that I can go get some tires put on this thing and start driving it. So I kind of forgot I have to replace the stud while I'm in here. I know I'm going to have to take the brakes apart to get the new one in, but since the old one is so short, I can at least probably knock it out with the brakes in. This isn't an actual lug nut that I'm going to use on the car, but it has really deep threads. Rather than using a nut like this, the nut's only going to be on a couple threads. This covers a lot more surface area because it could take more torque to pull this stud actually into the flange than what the normal lug nut and stud would have on them just to hold the wheel on. And you don't want to mess these threads up by putting all that torque on there, so the more surface area that this is going to put on there, it's going to be better for it. You also want to make sure you have a couple washers on there. If your nut is capped like this, rather than a nut that the threads can go all the way through, that way you're not bottoming out inside here rather than pulling this through. So we're going to throw a couple washers on there. Should be good. And I'm going to put a little bit of grease on these threads because you want to minimize the amount of friction you have on the threads. That way all the force is just going to pulling that stud into the flange. Get the camera over here so maybe you can actually see the stud back here being pulled into the flange. Alright, so I had to swap out these larger washers that I had on there for some smaller ones because the larger ones were up on this lip and they were at an angle and it was pulling the stud in at an angle. So I got some smaller ones on there and we'll tighten that back down and pull it the rest of the way in. Alright, you'll feel it get really tight all of a sudden. You definitely want to stop there. Make sure it is actually flush all the way in. This one is. If you would not have that stud all the way flush in there and you put your wheel on, you torque your lug nuts, and then that stud, if it's not flush, will slowly be pulled in flush, which will loosen this lug nut. And you don't want that, so you do want to verify that it is completely flush in there. And this one's all good. Also, I was using a breaker bar. You can use a pry bar or something to put in the studs to keep this from turning as you're turning this. Obviously I can't really set the parking brake or anything like that because the brakes are off. So I got all the hubs and dust shields all painted on all four brakes. Threw some tape over the parking brake shoes, just the friction material, and over the studs. So I got the brake calipers all painted and they've been drying for like an hour and a half, I think. Gonna throw them back on the car. Also, you can buy this professional painter's part hold-up tool on Amazon. I think it was $1 million. Here's how the rotors turned out. Look pretty good. Time to start putting shit back together. I am going to give the parking brake a quick adjustment while I'm putting it back together too. I can't fully spin this because it's an all-wheel drive car, but I can spin it a little bit, and the way you adjust it is if you feel no resistance at all and it's easy to slide on over top of the shoes, then you keep expanding these out with the adjuster at the bottom until you feel just a little bit of resistance, and then you back it back off. There's an adjuster right here. You just spin that. Make sure you're spinning it the right way. See, now I can't even slide it over, so I went a little bit too far. That should be good. I should have plugged these holes when I painted, and I didn't. I'm gonna run this little wire brush through there. Maybe. That did pretty well. So I've got the hardware, the new hardware on the brackets. I've got the rubber boots put back in. I've put grease down in the boot because when you lube these pins and slide them together, that boot is actually going to kind of squish all that grease off of there. So it's nice to have some actually down inside there. Alright, I'm going to lube in here before I bolt this up, because if you have it on the rotor, you go to grease it, you'll get a lot of grease on the rotor itself. So it's easier if you just do it while it's off. You don't want to put too much on there because it will squish off and get on the rotor. So just a little bit. But you do want to definitely make sure you lube right here because the pads will seize up and rust if you don't. So start by bolting this up. That's how the manual says to torque that. Just kidding. Alright, you got 4 pads, 2 for each side. You want to make sure you have one with the squeaker and one without. Don't accidentally put both of these on this side or both of these on this side. Put it all back together and then get to the other side and you only have 2 of the same one, so 1 of each. These are fitting in pretty tight, so I'm actually going to take a file where they are painted and just kind of take some of that paint off right where it rides in there, because I don't want them to be that stiff in there. I've actually had to do this several times. Some people might say, oh, but now they're going to rust right there and blah blah blah. Well, what's rust going to do? It's going to make them get stuck in there. What's the paint going to do? It's making them get stuck in there. So as long as you got good grease on there, it should help prevent them from getting rusty. And then this way they'll actually move freely. That's a little better. Put just a little bit of grease on. Again, try not to get too much on there. Just a thin layer, because you don't want it to get on the rotor or the pad surface. The general rule is you want to put the squeaker on the leading edge of the pad, which is going to be this edge, because as this rotor spins, as I'm going down the road forward, this is where the pad's going to get hit first, which causes it to kind of kink in like this, and therefore this edge will kind of wear first. And also you want to put it on the inside if you can, because that's where the piston is, and that's kind of going to be which pad will generally wear the most, especially if the slide pins get rusted or aren't moving freely. There we go. Yeah, and that went in a lot easier than it did when I had paint on it. So it moves freely now. Perfect. Another little tip is it's good to put a little bit of grease back here where the bracket will be riding against it, just to help with noise, and also, again, with rust, just help prevent rust. You want everything to just be able to move in here freely, nothing to be rusted together or anything like that. And again, just a thin layer so that there's not too much excess squeezing out. And then the same on the back where the piston is going to be riding on the pad. Alright, definitely don't want to put this on and bolt it and then try to spin this hose on, because then the hose is just going to get twisted. So I'm going to pop this off, pop this cap out, tighten this hose into here, and then slide everything together. Also would have been smart to not lube this pin yet. And also I forgot, I already had this pin in. You only want to have one in, the top one, and you'll see why here in a minute. Alright, now we got the brake line hooked up. You can just throw one of your old pads in there. Got a caliper compressor. You just want to slowly push that piston back in. Don't want to go too hard, and you want to make sure you're centered on there because that piston can get jammed in the bore if it's off center. And once it's all the way in, stop. Do not force it any farther because again, you can jam it in there. Alright, now with just that top pin in, I can slide it in, slide it all the way on, and then slide it right over top of the pads. And then I just put my other one through. Make sure you got your boot lined up in there. Now that it's bolted up solid, make sure this line is tight. And there's one side done. Just wipe off the grease that I got everywhere. And now I need to go to work. I am way behind schedule to go to work, so I'm gonna quickly clean all this stuff up and continue this another day. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.